Welcome, educators, parents, and scholar gamers, to the Academy of Esports episode 14, Esports and Mental Health. I'm your host, James O'Hagan. This is the podcast where I delve into topics surrounding esports and education. Esports are organized competitive video games allowing schools to redefine their athletic culture, diversify opportunities for student participation, promote physical and mental health, increase collegiate scholarship pathways, and play games. We cannot forget the importance of play. The mission of the Academy of Esports is to support these ideals. The vision of the Academy of Esports is for all students to experience the fun and joy of playing competitive video games. In this episode, we will begin delving into the topic of esports and mental health. The tricky part of this is in this episode is that mental health has so many directions it can be taken. Specifically, I'm going to work from the mission of the Academy of Esports and look through the lens of student participation in schools. I will need to lay some groundwork. There will be stories shared along the way, but in the end, there will be three big takeaways from which to build a base of good mental health experiences for you and your students. So, let's get started. And so, I guess the first thing we need to start with when we are talking about mental health and esports is let's take the esports out of it. Let's begin to develop that common language that we all need to have in order to have this conversation. And it's important to do so because in the recent past, it has become acceptable for us to talk about mental health issues, both good and bad, ways we can support good mental health, and how do we help those who do not have good mental health. And mental health simply is a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. And that comes from the World Health Organization, and that's a definition that is used most commonly. Also, I feel it is worth noting here that when we are talking about this topic in particular is a very sensitive topic for a lot of people. I am not a mental health expert. I'm only speaking to this as an educator. I'm speaking to this as somebody who is not a mental health professional. And I'm speaking about this as somebody who is trying to do the best thing for kids through my research. I am a PhD student, but in the field of instructional technology and design, not in the field of psychology, not in the field of psychiatry. So take that, if you will, with a grain of salt. Am I looking for experts with which to discuss this topic a little more fully? Absolutely. Just like last week when I brought in CJ to speak about his disability and he dove into, for about a second, his own struggles with depression and mental health. And I want to make sure that we are kind of dovetailing from that conversation into this one. We will come back to this topic many times. It will happen. But I just want to make sure and reiterate that if you are curious on follow-up on this, I have included links in the show notes to resources that can help you to read more about this, learn more about this. But if you are struggling with your own issues of mental health, or you feel like you need to talk to somebody, there are usually community resources with which you can connect in order to get mental health services. Some places that you may think outside of a doctor's office, if you don't want to care to speak to your own personal physician or you don't have a personal physician, what is a great place to start having a conversation to figure out where can you get help through mental health services might be a group like the United Way, or it might be the public library for which you live, if you have access to either one of those resources. Many communities also have a community health hotline number, some counties, so like a 211 or a 311 phone number can help you as well too. So I just want to make sure that as we talk about this, that if you are struggling with your own issues, I am not an expert. I'm not giving you advice on how to deal with your mental health issues. I'm just giving you experiences and stories. And it starts again with how we are defining what mental health is: a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. And again, it has become a topic that is less taboo to discuss. In the past year, actually, probably the most public of mental health issues that have come up in an area that it hasn't been discussed before is in the NBA. professional sports, and specifically Kevin Love. Kevin Love is a basketball player currently for the Cleveland Cavaliers, and he detailed in a story that I linked in the show notes that he wrote himself, talking about his own issues dealing with anxiety as an NBA player. Kevin Love is an excellent NBA player. He was part of a group that won the championship, the world championship in the NBA, a team that included LeBron James, Kyrie Irving. And he has for a long time been an excellent basketball player, but he was really, I think, the first in the NBA to openly discuss his own issues with mental health. And so it is worth noting that the tide is changing right now, that mental health is becoming a topic that is shared. However, I will say with one caveat that I worry as we are diving into topics of mental health, in that people can misuse the term, can toss it around so it becomes almost a flippant part of conversation. It is something that needs to always be discussed seriously and honestly with other people. It cannot be used or should not be used to gain publicity or sympathy. It should be something that is used to, when you're talking about it, to help the other person. So I don't want the issues of mental health to become background noise. Become something that when the topic comes up, people's eyes glaze over and they don't feel it is important to tune in and talk about what it is that people are experiencing. So Kevin Love, if you want to read about it, again, the link are in the show notes. You can read about his own personal experience. And one of the things he did struggle with is that, as we've talked about mental health, is that typically it is in boys and men that society has said they're supposed to be strong and they're not supposed to have these issues. That is absolutely not the case. And I kind of want to back out from there because I've kind of talked about what mental health is and kind of how the perceptions and talking about it has changed. And what I want to go into now is just talk about my own community a little bit. I want to talk about how mental health is being impacted in Racine and why it is, I feel, important to bring esports into our schools in the Racine Unified School District and across the state of Wisconsin. If you don't know anything about Racine, Wisconsin, I'll give you a very, very brief history. We were a city south of Milwaukee, north of Chicago, kind of in between, right on Lake Michigan, where at one time we were a manufacturing hub of not just the United States, but also the world. We still have a lot of great industries here. One of the biggest ones that we have still as headquartered here in the city of Racine is SC Johnson. So if you know people who make Ziploc bags, your polishes, your waxes, bug sprays, those are, that's SC Johnson products. And over the years, a lot of that industry moved away. Racine also sits far off the expressway. We're one of the largest cities that sits about 6 miles off of the I-94 expressway in southeast Wisconsin. So that kind of puts us at a disadvantage. And over the years, the city of Racine has gone from one of the richest cities in the United States to one of the poorest cities in the United States. And in particular, when we're talking about mental health, a subsection of that or a part of that I want to discuss very briefly with you as I continue to lay groundwork here is I want to talk about adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs as they're also called. So an adverse childhood experience is something that is a childhood trauma, okay? It is something that could be a variety of different things. It could relate to your home experience, or it can relate to a personal experience. So from a home experience, if you are in any way sexually abused, physically abused, mentally abused. If you're talking about it from a home perspective, do you have a stable home? Is there an alcoholic living in your house? Did your parents separate? When you look at these things, you start to tally these things up, okay? And usually people can have a score anywhere from 0 to 8. Me personally, looking at my ACE score, I have an ACE score of 3. So the higher the score, the more likely, it's not a sure thing, but the more likely the person is to try risky behaviors, okay? From smoking and drinking to even attempting suicide. The person is also more likely to have their own mental and physical health issues. So in the city of Racine, and actually in Racine County, we have 62% of adults report having at least one adverse childhood experience, okay? So again, that could be as simple as parents are divorced, and I don't like you saying that's simple, but it's not. But divorce is considered an ACE, and that's one of mine. I also come from, and I will speak honestly about my own experience. One of my other ACE experience, my adverse childhood experiences, is that I'm the son of an alcoholic, and also that so I've got I was never sexually abused or physically abused or mentally abused, but I at least have two, I should say. I think I said three, but I think I at least have two, and I don't remember what the other one may be. But the Racine County where I live, 62% adults report having at least one. And here's the thing, is this becomes a compound problem in a community. Now, what can reduce the impact of ACEs, of these adverse childhood experiences? And a big one is, to reduce the trauma, is you want to make sure that a child has at least one caring adult in his or her life. And I would like to think that our educators are people who can be those caring adults in the lives of our children in our community. That's not always the case. I would like to think that parents can be that caring adult in our childhood experiences, but that isn't always the case. Or a member of the church, or a member of the community, or somebody at the public library, or anywhere, okay? Any adult can make that childhood experience less traumatic. People with ACEs, with those adverse experiences, they can have trouble later in life, because when children are constantly angry, vigilant, or in fear, or stress-induced chemicals will hinder brain development during a critical time. About 700 new neural connections form every second during a person's first 3 years of life. So think about that. In the first 3 years of life, you've got 700 new neural connections being made, and these ACE experiences can hinder those ACEs can hinder that brain development. So when you're talking about the children of parents who have high ACE scores, you can see how the compounding and generational issues can start to manifest and develop throughout children. And so when we're talking about how do we work with kids with ACEs, and this is something that the Racine Unified School District, I think, has started to do a really good job beginning to address. I'm not saying we're there yet, but we are beginning to address, is through a process called trauma-informed care. And I know this is, I'm kind of getting into the weeds a little bit here. I know we're supposed to be talking about how esports and mental health tie together, but I feel it is really important to lay this bit of groundwork, because just jumping into the stories of people who suffer from traumatic experiences or have high ACE scores or depressions or whatever it may be, it's first important for us to have this set. So when we talk about trauma-informed care, that means considering a child's background when working with them. It means, for one example, seeing a child not as a manipulative, but as seeking to get their needs met. What can I do for you? Okay, not what is wrong with you. What can I provide for you? And when we're talking about esports in schools, for many of our students, again, that childhood connection to a positive adult, that positive adult experience needs to be there. And when I think about my own community, I think about the kids who are typically coming to us through esports are the ones who are not yet connected in with an adult in a positive experience. They're not the ones really connected in to their schools. These are kids who are sometimes on the fringes, who don't see school as being relevant to them, or us honoring their sense of play and then connecting them into the community. So as we're talking about mental health and we're talking about esports, keep in mind the reduction of, or the mitigation, I should say, of ACE experience, the adverse childhood experiences can be mitigated by the presence of a caring adult in the child's life. And we also know that video gaming can be beneficial for the brain. And again, there's a link of this in the show notes, but the Max Planck Institute in Germany came out with a study and said video gaming causes increases in the brain regions responsible for spatial orientation, memory formation, and strategic planning, as well as fine motor skills. The positive effects of video gaming may also prove relevant in therapeutic interventions targeting psychiatric disorders. Most interestingly, these changes were more pronounced the more desire the participants reported to play the video game. So if we take those adverse childhood experiences and we tie that into the gaming experience, we tie that into esports, we know that we can actually start to stimulate parts of the brain that may have been impacted through these adverse childhood experiences. We know that it can provide therapeutic benefits for a child through gaming. And we also know that the desire to play the video game, these impacts in mental health, in positive changes into the brain chemistry and the brain structure, were more pronounced. I mean, those are reasons why I look at people who want to focus on the stereotypes of games and are stuck in that. And that's why I'm talking to all of you right now. These are the reasons why I speak to all of you right now, because I believe that if, again, we are just focusing on the gameplay, if we just look at the game and not at the broader picture, that we are missing out on something so much greater and so much more. So I'm sorry if you hear me sniffling and stuff. I can tell I'm on the very edge of a head cold. So I want to make sure that I get this episode in tonight before this head cold. It's like a storm's coming in and I can feel it. So I'm just trying to get out in front of it right now. But we've talked about what mental health is. We've talked about adverse childhood experiences. Talked about how video games can be beneficial for the brain. Let's just talk about play for a second, okay? And I link in the show notes an article called The Importance of Play, and it's by a Dr. Alicia Goldstein. And she wrote about some studies, and one in particular said adults who were put in an enriched environment where the cues elicited play. Through play, they became more engaged, more open, and most of them seemed to genuinely enjoy the experience, okay? Engaging play reduces stress and promotes creativity, productivity, openness, while revitalizing our sense of aliveness, is what she said. It is literally a natural antidepressant. So think of that student who is coming into your classroom and you don't know their ACE score. You don't know if they couch surfed last night, meaning are they bouncing between homes? Is their home even stable right now? Are the parents separated? Are they going through physical abuse, mental abuse, sexual abuse? Any of these things can total up and tally very quickly, especially in a young child. We have young children coming to us, and I've seen it firsthand. Children coming to us in crisis in the city of Racine. And we sometimes get ourselves lost in the weeds where we don't honor the importance of play enough. We tend to see play as a luxury, as something that isn't important in the development of our children, nor do we see play as being an important thing for our adults. And I myself am somebody who loves to play games. I play softball, I play rugby, I do CrossFit. These are, to me, the games that help me to feel alive. These are the games that make me feel productive, because as we are mindful of play and we routinely engage in it in our own lives, we can create positive neural shifts that, when practiced and repeated, can build resilience and lead to an increased sense of self-worth and happiness. Excuse me. So when I was a classroom teacher and I taught fifth grade students, I didn't teach fifth grade, I taught fifth grade students. It's important to say that. I really did enjoy play. I enjoyed taking the kids outside. I enjoyed giving them that release. I enjoyed us doing that, not just at lunchtime, but also at the end of the day. And also saying to my students, I'm giving you little homework. And the reason for little homework is you're 10 years old, you're fifth graders. I would like for you to go outside and play when you get home. And I never quantified what that play meant. I know I had a lot of students who like to play video games. But it is important for us to honor and bring that play into our students' lives. So if you are a classroom teacher, elementary, middle school, even high school, it is important for us to honor our students' sense of want to play. So bringing all those things together allows me to bring in then specifically talking about esports and mental health. And there was a great article that was shared with me called Let's Talk About Mental Health in Esports. 10 individuals share their stories. And I picked 3 of the stories. And the reason why I picked these 3 was I felt that they highlighted best people who had experienced struggles based on mental health issues, particularly with school and connected with school. And I wanted to share those stories with you just so you could kind of hear how esports impacted them. If you want to look at all the stories of these individuals, again, the link is in the show notes. The show note links are in the description if you're listening to the podcast, or if you're on YouTube, they're in the show description. Usually it's esports.irish/EP 14 in this case it will be. So esports.irish/EP1 4. But in the case of these individuals, I picked out 3 of them. George Hoskins, Dan Harrison, and Josh Leighton Lang. And the reason, again, I picked these is, again, because I felt that they connected with students in esports, and I want to share these quickly with you. 2 of them, I'm going to share their full stories, and one I'm going to share a portion of their story. They're not very long, but I want to make sure that you hear these if you have not read this or you're listening to this somewhere else. So in regards to George Hoskins, he is a streamer and a former CSS pro. CSS, I'm assuming that means Counter-Strike Source, which is a video game. It's a first-person shooter for those of you who don't know. And he says, I have OCD, Asperger's, and was recently diagnosed with CFS. It's been a mental 2016, but got to be positive and help others. I'm also battling depression and anxiety. I find it really hard going from the top of something to being forgotten. It's a tough battle. It's been a battle dealing with being a top player in Source worldwide to out of the limelight in CSGO. That's Counter-Strike Go a bit. It's something I talk to people about, as esports isn't always a guarantee. That was CGS era when the recession hit and killed it for a while. Some things in gaming were positive, however. It got me to socialize, and I have made a few great friends who I keep in touch with. There have been some positives, but a lot of negatives. I think it's important for people to realize, as all I see are kids throwing away everything to make it in video games, and the reality isn't that great sometimes. I just think it's important these kids have backup plans, as I never did. It's left me a bit in a lurch. And it is important as we develop these positive experiences with our students that we, again, don't just focus on the games. We can't just focus on the games. We may have students who are going to be fantastic gamers, but we need to look at some other things, connect them into industries, connect them into their interest within the games. Talk to them. Do they like the storytelling? Do they want to be shoutcasters? Do they want to be data analysts? Do they want to be coaches? Don't just focus so much on the game, because the games are changing rapidly all the time. The second person I want to talk about is Dan Harrison. He's a League of Legends support player with a team called Excel Sports Esports. And he says, when I was in 6th form at 19 years old, I was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and started to miss a ton of school. Although I finished my A-levels, I hadn't been attending school for 6 months, and my grades suffered heavily. When I eventually joined a team, it helped having something in my schedule, something that get me out of bed and something that I had to commit to. It made it easier for me to eventually start adding other stuff to my life. And as of last September, I am now on a college course and hoping to attend university in September. My mental state was really bad. I'd get mood swings and I'd feel suicidal at my lowest points. Gaming was a good distraction, as it really engaged. It was really engaging, and I'd have to put 100% of my focus into it, so it helped me to forget about my problems, even if for just 30 to 40 minutes at a time. During a rough time in my life, competing gave me something to focus on and work towards. It was something I had motivation for, and I feel like I would have struggled to get back into education if I hadn't pursued gaming during the time between my A-levels and now. So as I read Dan's story, I think of the students who don't have anywhere else to turn but their computers in their rooms. And that's not always a bad thing. As one of our previous guests indicated, I think it was Dan Himmelstein, said that a lot of people are fantastic in-game leaders. You may see them on the street and you may not know it. You may see them at work and they may be quiet. You may see them at school and they may not be ones who speak up. But you put them into a video game environment and they become leaders. They become connected. They feel a sense of relatedness. And I'm going to get into self-determination theory in just a second here. But all these things I think about our students who don't have anything right now with which to connect to in schools through esports. And I think, are we doing our students the best service by ignoring esports or strapping ourselves to the stereotypes of the past and just saying, this is the way it is and this is the way I see it? I'm trying to educate every educator into the possible benefits that they could gain with their students through this endeavor. One more story, and I didn't take the whole story. You can read his whole story, and it was because even he said it at one point, he was rambling a bit, but his rambling was important. I don't want to say it as a negative. It lay a lot of groundwork, but I got to the core of what his comments were, and I want to detail those here. This was Josh Leighton Lang. He's a Vainglory content creator. Vainglory is a mobile game. It's played on cell phones. He's also a moderator and a freelance graphic artist, and he says this: esports helps people like me to be ourselves. Gaming in general helps people melt away all the terrible things that's going on in their heads. We get to live and relate to stories and characters or struggles with teams on a daily basis instead of having a self-imposed weight drag us into the dark depths of our own psyches. It allows us to connect to people just like us. Dealing with your issues is difficult, but with esports and gaming, we're all in the same boat. We're all pushing for the same thing. It's a level playing field, and while we might get salty and tilted about those clutch ranked losses that stop us from going up a tier, we're all one community that has always and will always form the most ridiculous support network anyone could ever ask for, and I'm beyond glad to be part of it. And that really gets into a very big core of what esports is, and that is relatedness. And that is a core tenet of self-determination theory. Self-determination theory talks about intrinsic and extrinsic motivations, why people do certain things that they do, and how do we get them to do it and to what levels. And what all people want to feel when they are doing something, whether they do it intrinsically or extrinsically, they want to feel a sense of relatedness. For it to be successful and impactful, they want to feel related to what it is. They want to feel a connection to somebody else. And when you're talking about an esports community built around a game, you're talking about that built-in support network of people all working towards the same thing, whether it's just your team or whether it's teams playing other teams across the state, or your students are playing other people or with other people around the world. They want to feel that. They also want to feel a sense of autonomy. Gaming allows students to feel that sense of autonomy because we as adults don't own it. We want to try to control it, but we don't. We really just don't. Esports has become almost this great community where everybody can have an equal participation, whether you're male or female, whether you are able-bodied or disabled. Everybody can have a part and a say in the building of that community. And in self-determination theory, people want to feel a sense of competency. They want to feel competent in what they do. And that's not to say you're going to feel successful every time that you do something, but you want people to begin to feel like they're getting from, they're doing that growth mindset part that Dan and Jake talked about in the past. Dan Himmelstein and Jake Middleton talked about in the past episodes, where you set a goal, and did you meet the goal or not? And if you didn't meet the goal, what did you do that kept you from meeting that goal, and what can you do to create a new goal and help you move forward? Okay, you want to feel all those things. And in esports, when we get students feeling those things, you can, and again, we connect that back to mental health. We find that gaming is a support system for a lot of people. Gaming is something that connects them to an adult. Okay, it helps to reduce those ACE scores. It helps to build your brain, to be beneficial in building those neural networks. And it goes back to being an important part of play, that honoring that sense of play. Intrinsic things that students want to do. You're saying, okay, you want to play, how do you want to play? Well, video games is what you want to play. Let's play video games. Let's pull in that intrinsic motivation, and let's, again, start to rebuild and build good mental health. So if I'm going to talk about key takeaways, let's say you're a coach, you're a teacher, you're thinking about starting an esports team, no matter the game that you're focusing on, you're thinking about starting a team. Here's my 3 takeaways. Number 1, honor the importance of play. When you're talking about play, again, we want to make sure that play reduces stress, that it promotes creativity, productivity, openness, and revitalizing that sense of aliveness. We want to, again, our second thing, we want to create environments with positive interactions between adults and children to mitigate adverse childhood experiences, to mitigate and to control those students who are coming to us with high ACE scores. Again, my city, my community of Racine, we have a lot of students and a lot of adults with high ACE scores. By bringing those students in particular into gaming, into esports, we connect them now in with adults, we connect them in with play, and now we're reducing and mitigating those high ACE scores. And finally, our third key takeaway in all of this, through self-determination theory, we want to foster a sense of relatedness, competency, and autonomy between students. Many students are already intrinsically motivated to play games, so let's honor that. And that will do it for this week on the Academy of Esports. I've been your host, James O'Hagan. You may follow me on Twitter at Jim O'Hagan, at JIMOHAGAN, and through the Academy of Esports account on Twitter at TAO Esports. That's letter TAOESPORTS. It's a great way to get the latest blog posts, podcast episodes, and news coming out of esports and education. And remember, you can continue your engagement by going to www.taoesports.com or through Facebook at www.facebook.com/TAOesports. Thanks again for listening, and I look forward to our time again next week.